Welcome to the Metamorphosis podcast, where we explore the possibilities and processes of personal and community transformation based on the ancient wisdom of Kemet, one of many classical African civilizations, as a foundation. I am Dr. Catherine Lynn Adams, an associate professor of African and African American Studies at Claflin University, where I teach courses on oral and literary traditions of the African world, with an emphasis on interviewing and archiving the stories of our elders. I am serving as a scribe for this project. Joining me is Baba Derrick Jackson. Baba Derrick is the priest and thought leader of Christ Universal Temple, a spiritual community in South Carolina. As I'm listening to you, I am thinking of the contrast between a tradition where wondrous things happen, but they are singular events.
Hmm.
And then there is Kemet, where there may be some things that happen in that liberation story, that mythology, but there is repetition of those things that happen. So if you understand the metaphors, that those things continue to be possible and accessible. And it makes me wonder why we have such a hard time with a tradition where so much of the information is accessible and interrelated to the experience that we live every day. But we don't have a hard time with a tradition that is filled with events for which, if we believe them as history, we'll never see another resurrection in that way again. So, how do we connect to it? We will never see the parting of a sea in that way. So, how might we connect to those things? And I'm wondering, why do you think it's easier for us to believe a book that people say has historical accounts of something that happened and things that will happen, but we don't have any connection to those things? But then we have a connection to this other tradition, but it seems like heresy or blasphemous or or not of God.
You ask a very deep and profound question that a podcast wouldn't have enough time to answer. Okay. But let me introduce some words we haven't used up until this time. Words like ma'afa, words like post-traumatic, uh, post-traumatic slave syndrome, words like distortion, disinformation, distraction, dis-ease rather than disease, all play a role into what happened, why we won't accept. And we don't have enough time for me to take you down that road of all the things, because every time we reach that precipice of going to where we need to go, those who brought us here in the first place to be there, to be in servitude, always seem to be able to interrupt. That's another D that I needed to, that disruption happens to keep us from making those kinds of connections. Whether it is through the death of the person or people who are trying to bring you that information, the destruction of the person or people who are trying, or the domination of the people or a person that's trying to bring you that information. And it keeps happening over and over. And so and the people who are doing it can look just like us. So we can't just blame someone else for what they do. We got to take some responsibility for the information we're putting in the minds of our people. But first, let me put it on a personal level. First, I had to recognize there is a problem here. And I had to recognize that a majority of the problem is the information I was receiving that's supposed to be about life. Now, and we call it the healing modality here at the temple. What was my participation in that disinformation? What was my participation in the distortion, the disruption, disease? And then comes a point when I must turn away from that and find something else. And so it would be just easy to say, well, you know, they crazy, black folk crazy, they just don't want to give it up. No, it's complicated, as we like to say at the temple. It's very complicated as to the interference with us making that step. So it's been a long haul for me. You know, books, experience, meeting people, trying to put things together. But I'll tell you what my take is on a personal level. When I noticed people will tell you the who, people will tell you the when, they'll tell you the where, they'll tell you the what, but I noticed they kept secret the why. Rarely do people ever come to you and tell you the why. And it wasn't until I went into laboratory science, where in medical laboratory science, you have to know the why in order to treat the dis-ease. If you don't know the why, then you're giving people stuff that might not work. You're just playing around with the patient. But the patient requires, if you want them to live, to know the why, because then stuck in the why is the other 4 W's. And then you can give treatment to it once you know and understand the why. When you hear scientists say we had a breakthrough, it's because they discovered the why. And so because of that training of The why, I'm always curious. Why did Kemet tell us that story, that mythology? Why did Kemet build pyramids, temples? Why did they write the literature that they wrote in reference to their relationship to the divine, their relationship to each other, in their relationship to the cosmos, in their relationship to the ecology? Because the why is profoundly deep. It's a deep study into the movement of people. And then when I studied the why, not just to our existence, but the why to the people who brought us here, that helped in me being able to separate Western knowledge from, let me put it in Africana studies way, separate ways of knowing. That I understood there's a particular way of knowing among our people when you study our people in a governance kind of conversation, as opposed to a social structure kind of conversation. And once I learned that separation, then I moved totally toward the governance conversation. And most of us don't get that opportunity, because I've already said to you that when I'm talking to the congregation, they want me to go there, but then the leadership doesn't.
Can you say something about the timeline of those two traditions? Because I think that also is something that you always echo to us to understand the timeline.
Yeah. The question that I now like to ask people is, do you believe, even if you don't have the evidence, that African people are the oldest human beings on earth? And usually, and when I ask them by raise of hand, I would say 98 to 99% of the people in the room, there's always some contrarians, will raise their hand. And if we are the oldest people in the world, I'd ask the audience, how old do you think we are? Rather than me forcing it on them, I want the audience always to tell me where their head is, because I'm going to use that as the basis of my starting point, right? And so when I get different results, oh, we're maybe 8,000. And then somebody will say, well, I read this story about Lucy, and we might be 1.3 million years. And after people have done that, I'll say, okay, then let's agree to start at 100,000 years. So if we're 100,000 years old, then how old is the biblical text? And they know, most of the audience know that right away. Oh, it's around 6,000, 8,000 years old. So, okay, I'm going to use your best guess that it's 8,000 years old. So the difference between the biblical text and its origin story and our birth is approximately 92,000 years. So my next question, what were we doing for 92,000 years before the biblical text was written? And the room is silent. As my grandmother used to say, you could hear a rat pissing on cotton. It was so quiet up in there. Okay? The mere fact that you don't know what happened over those 92,000 years is intentional. And that story needs to be any story you want to tell about us need to be started from the beginning. What did we say to each other before the first foreigner showed up? And that usually captivates the room. Well, Baba Derrick, what were we doing? Now I got the room, right? I can go where I want to go. And then Anthony Browder, to me, did one of the greatest, not greatest, I would just say a great service to us who do presentations. He wrote out a timeline, right? And his timeline is approximately 19 feet long. And then I'll ask 6 people from the audience to come up, and I roll out his timeline like a scroll. And when you look at that timeline of the things we were doing, and then ask the next question, when was Abraham born? Because according to the biblical text, Western biblical text, you can't have Christianity without Abraham. Am I right? Yes. Okay, give me a date. Some people will say 800 BC, 900 BC. And I'll say, I'm going to do something better for you. I'm going to take Abraham back to 1672 BC. Now, where did I get that number from? Markaroo, Dr. Ben. Okay. And I said, let me walk down here. Can you come up here and tell me, is this around 1672? And the person would say, yeah, that's about in that area. And then I asked another person to come up. Well, now walk down to the beginning of Kemetic, according to this timeline. And when people see the 2 points and how long it came before Abraham was even born, they said, oh my God, OMG, you know how Black folks say that, right? And the fact that you don't know anything about this time period should tell you something about how you've been miseducated. And it was done on purpose.
Thank you for another rich episode. We want to archive something special that was established in 2000, more than 2 decades ago. In upcoming episodes, we will be exploring the history of Christ Universal Temple, its teachings on spirituality and personal growth, and its role in the Columbia, South Carolina community. We invite you to like, comment, and subscribe to receive notifications for future episodes. Thank you for listening.